Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Tracy Craig. I'll be moderating this meeting. I see some familiar faces, so thanks for coming out tonight. This meeting tonight is, I don't even know what, the 10th? The 10th community meeting. We're here to update you on environmental investigation and remediation in association with the former Ford Aeronutronics property where they did aerospace research and development. I think most of you probably know that, but I just want to make sure I'm going to do a couple housekeeping things. Bathrooms with the store. Food, very important, over here with water. When you came in, you should have signed in, and we'll put you on a mailing list. We won't use that for any other reason other than to email you information on this project. There are also some handouts that you should have gotten. So I want to call attention to that. And then tonight we do have a panel. We're going to be giving a very short presentation. It's actually just a quick overview of what's changed since the last time we were out here. And then we'll have questions and answers. You're welcome to stop us during the presentation as well. I do want to call attention to the fact that this meeting is being recorded, and that's because we'll live stream it so people can watch it virtually. And then you can also, if you so choose, go back and watch it if you want on YouTube, or refer it to neighbors that missed this meeting. So if you do ask a question, I'm going to come over with a microphone because we want to make sure that your voice gets picked up for any viewers that are electronic. Okay, I'm going to introduce our panel. I think most of you know everybody, but first of all, I want to call attention to the fact that for the first time ever, we do have a council member here. So Council Member Robin Grant is here representing District 4. I don't know if everybody probably knows her. But first time we've had a council member here, so I want to thank you for your attendance. And then also with us tonight we have Ken Connor, which is with WSP, which is the environmental consultant. And then going down the road we have Jessica Law. I think everybody knows Jessica is the project manager for the water board, and we've been leading this project for 6 years now. And then next to Jessica is Daniela Hammond-Nazaroff. Yeah. She is the consultant. She's leading the project for Wood. Well, it's WSP, but it used to be Wood Environmental. And then next to her is Amanda Palumbo. She's with the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, also referred to as OEHA. Now we know why, because that's a mouthful. All right, we get to the next slide. Purpose of the meeting tonight, again, is just to update you on site investigations, proposed remediation and mitigation strategies, and then also, most importantly, to answer questions. If you have questions specific to your property, we would like to talk with you afterwards about those. It just makes more sense, so we usually stay afterwards. And we have these maps over here. We'll stay there, and you're welcome to come ask questions specific to your property. If you have a general question, please feel free to ask it during the meeting. Again, I'm just going to call attention to the fact that I'm not going to read all that. Don't worry. Here are the handouts that you have. And I think with that, I will hand it over to Jessica. Just a reminder, though, if you do have a question, please just raise your hand, and I will bring the microphone over to you. And I'm a stickler about that, so Harry will tell you. Okay, thanks.
I always say, if you guys can't hear me, give me the thumbs up, let me know, and I'll speak into it more. Is that better? Okay. All right. And I still have a tendency to wander away, so let me know. So tonight's presentation, we're going to do that quick little project recap, kind of give you the how and why we got here, why this particular assessment began. We'll go over just a broad vapor intrusion overview, especially for any new folks, so you guys know what it is. And then we'll dive into what has happened since our last public meeting. So we'll cover new items since July of last year, and then give a remediation progress update and go into what the next steps are going to be, as well as kind of a really loose project schedule. And then we'll finish with our question and answer session. So first, let me get the laser pointer out. I just want to get everyone oriented here. So on the west side, this here is Jamboree Road. We've got Bison up here, and then MacArthur Boulevard up at the top is the 73. The green outline here, that is the 200 acres that Ford leased, and the blue outline area here, that's where the facility operated. It was about 98 acres in size, and they operated from 1957 until they closed in 1993. And following closure of the facility, that's when cleanup activities began, and they occurred for about 3 years. In 1996, based on information that was provided by Ford, the Santa Ana Water Board determined that remediation of that main area was complete. And in 1997, the local oversight program, which was the regulatory agency at that time, they granted soil closure. And that soil closure allowed the property to be rezoned from industrial use to residential use. And redevelopment began in 1998, which is now the One Ford Road community. There was still the requirement for continued off-site groundwater assessment and remediation, and that's when the case was transferred to the Santa Ana Water Board. Since that time, the case has been open with us, and all work has been conducted by Ford under a voluntary agreement. So in addition to the cleanup activities, closer, gotcha, there we go. In addition to the cleanup activities of the former facility and the ongoing off-site groundwater assessment, monitoring, and remediation, in 2006, 2008, and 2012, there were limited soil gas assessments that were done, and they were done in select areas, and they concluded that there were no health risks. Based on soil gas samples, there were no indoor air samples collected at that time, and it was based on industry knowledge of vapor intrusion. Now, those conclusions were made prior to the US EPA's 2014 memo regarding short-term exposure risks, as well as the 2016 updated environmental screening levels by the San Francisco Bay Water Board. I've talked about those ESLs in the past. I'm not going to go over what screening levels are this time, but if you have specific questions, let me know and we can answer any of those questions. So in 2017, the Santa Ana Water Board requested that Ford prepare and submit a conceptual site model. And that's a report that looks at all of the site history, it looks at all of the data that's been collected, and it compares it to the current screening levels, as well as comparing it to industry standards, current industry standards. So that report identified a couple data gaps, and one of them was the need to reevaluate the site for potential vapor intrusion based on groundwater concentrations and those historical soil gas assessment results. And in 2018, that is when the vapor intrusion assessment began. So again, many of you have heard this little overview, but this time I wanted to put up some of the basic definitions. I'm not going to read through all of them, but they're here more so for your reference. But the figure, it shows the conceptual model of vapor intrusion, which is just the movement or migration of chemicals in a vapor phase into a building. And these red arrows on the figure kind of show how they can migrate below ground. But first, in order for there to be the potential for vapor intrusion, you have to have contaminated soil gas. And that contamination can come from either contaminated soil or dissolved contamination in groundwater. And that soil gas is found, we've got this little inlay here. The soil gas is found in the air spaces between these soil particles, and that's where it resides and can move below ground. So as that soil gas moves below the ground, it can enter buildings through either cracks in the foundation or utilities or other kind of preferential pathways, or what we call vapor conduits. Now, normal ventilation can flush the chemicals out of a building so that it doesn't cause a problem. But if they do collect in a building and there's not enough ventilation to flush it out, it may collect at concentrations that can pose a risk to human health. But there can also be other sources of chemicals, both in outdoor air and indoor air. So if there's bad air pollution outside, that can get into homes. And if there's chemicals used in the home from cleaning products, dry clean clothes, furniture, we've seen it in some scented candles, that can introduce chemicals into indoor air as well. Which is why when we do these vapor intrusion investigations, we're collecting samples from below the ground, in your home, and outside the home. So another component that I want to talk about is just vapor behavior. It's very dynamic. So the shallower those vapors are found, the more the vapors are influenced by both natural and man-made controlling factors. So those natural factors include temperature, pressure, wind, precipitation, climate, soil type, as well as soil moisture. And then the man-made factors can be how the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning unit is operated within a building, as well as changes to the building pressure. Heating can create a stack effect, so it can pull vapors from below the ground into a building, and building conditions such as the age of the building, the foundation type, as well as size, all influence how vapors behave. So now we come on to the new stuff. So this is just an overview of what has happened from July 1st to December 31st, 2022. There's been a lot of other activities that have occurred in the last 4+ years. I'm not going to give any of those summaries or updates. There are other meetings that have covered that at length. And so if you have questions, we can definitely get answers for those. But first, we're going to talk about the assessment and monitoring new things. So when it comes to the vapor intrusion assessment, 9 additional soil gas probes were installed. 257 soil gas probes were sampled over the last 6 months, and 33 homes were also sampled as part of their first rounds of sampling. It wasn't some of the longer term sampling. So then 2 homes have been offered air purifiers in the last 6 months. One of them was a newly identified home. Another one was a home that had been previously identified as having vapor intrusion, but the resident had declined to have an air purifier. But then I believe property ownership switched and the new owners wanted the air purifier, so they were delivered that. And that just hits a really important point of, if you live within the indoor air investigation and you have previously declined to have your home sampled when offered indoor air sampling, it's never too late to change your mind. Just reach out to that 800 number that Ford has, and they will get you in touch with WSP to coordinate indoor air sampling. Same goes with if you have exceedances and you initially decline to have the air purifiers, you can go back and say, you know what, I've changed my mind, and talk to WSP about that if you had vapor intrusion occurring and it's been offered. Another great milestone that has happened was no homes were added to the indoor air investigation area in the last 6 months, and that was the same with the previous meeting. So in the last year, the soil gas plume is not expanding. We're not seeing it moving, and we have finally, I think, have it fully delineated because of the heavy rain events that have kind of happened recently. A couple of the soil gas probes had no flow, but the one that had detection or had the opportunity to get a sample from, there was no detections of the chemicals that we're looking at, and that is good news. We've been wanting to get this thing fully delineated, and so we're there. Data gap assessment.
1 moment, okay?
While you're on that slide, you indicate 2 homes were offered air purifiers. In which communities were those 2 homes located?
That's a great question. I don't know.
Well, of course, it's a great question. I asked it. I've also heard that there were anywhere from 2 to 25 homes offered air purifiers. It's interesting to see that there's only 2.
So
Is that a moving number?
No. So this is new homes offered air purifiers. So before, like I said, this is just what's occurred in the last 6 months. And so I think we're at a total of 29 homes have been offered those air purifiers to date. But yeah. And I don't recall if the one that was the new one had recently joined the indoor air sampling or not, or if it I don't think it was that conditions changed over time. But I don't recall.
You indicate there's 29 homes have been offered air purifiers. Do you know where those 29 homes are located, in which of the communities?
Yeah, so the majority of them are in the Bay Ridge Park community, which is why we are trying to get the soil vapor extraction systems in there. The next one, there's a few that have been identified in Belcourt Terrace, which is where the other soil vapor extraction system is going to be getting installed. And then a couple just outliers around that we're still monitoring. Yes, sorry.
I'm going to ask you to repeat that so he can hear
Okay.
that, and then we have another question.
So the majority of where the air purifiers have been offered is Bay Ridge Park, and that's where we're working to get a soil vapor extraction system installed to address that vapor intrusion. Right now they have air purifiers if vapor intrusion's been identified. The other area has been Belcourt Terrace, a couple of homes there, and that's also where a remediation system will be getting installed.
A quick question. Is it true that for a resident homeowner to get a purifier, they have to sign a waiver of liability?
I'll leave that one for Daniela.
No, we just have folks sign like a waiver that says, yes, I agree to have this put in my home. It's sort of like allowing us to come in and place it. We offer electrical reimbursements for operating the air purifier, so we do get, if you would like if you'd like to be reimbursed, information from the property owner so that we can pay them for the electricity use. But there's no waiver of liability or anything on that.
And it's at no cost as well.
It's at no cost.
I find it odd that the homes that need the air purifiers are strictly in Bay Ridge Park and Belcourt Terrace, and that there are no homes in One Ford Road. Why is that? Do you have any idea?
So there is one home that had exceedances. I know it's still questionable if it was vapor intrusion or is it indoor air sources. Sometimes it can be a little tricky. So out of an abundance of caution, they were offered. Now, One Ford Road, that community had extensive remediation back in the 90s. And from the data that has been collected, that remediation was very effective, and which is really good news because we haven't seen this increase in concentrations. That can happen. Historical remediation, we've seen in other sites where they cleaned up, they got their good bill of health. You come back later and concentrations have increased again. We haven't seen that there, which says when these remediation systems are installed for these other two communities, we have really high confidence that it's going to effectively and efficiently remove that remaining mass and address that vapor intrusion risk. All right, so then next would be some of the data gap assessment. When we're getting the soil gas concentrations, in a couple areas, it's raised a few additional questions. And so we've collected additional groundwater samples. 5 groundwater grab samples were collected in 2 different locations, and they were collected at multiple depths below the ground surface. And then finally, that long-term indoor air monitoring plan. So this long-term indoor air monitoring is really important because it provides that analytical data to support that conditions are not changing over time. And if they do, then we will know about it and we can respond accordingly, which will minimize any risk to you. But I'm going to say we don't anticipate any changes given the analytical results that I've seen for the site so far. Almost all of the soil gas probes, the concentrations below the ground surface are continuing to decline over time, which is, again, that's a positive, that's a good thing. But it's still important to confirm because assumptions can be wrong, and so from the regulatory perspective, we don't like assumptions. They can give you a direction, but we want them always confirmed with analytical data. So I encourage anyone who has been offered to participate in that long-term indoor air monitoring plan to please sign up and participate now. 59 letters were mailed to properties in the last 6 months to include them in that long-term indoor air monitoring plan. These letters include the frequency for the indoor air sampling. It can be every 6 months up to once every 5 years. It's going to be based on future risk that was presented in those risk assessment reports, and that is determined based on soil gas data. So what was collected below ground. And then in the last 6 months, as part of that monitoring program, 19 homes were sampled. So to move on to the risk and remediation component, when it comes to risk, I'm talking about the human health risk assessment reports. We responded to 2 addendums. All the reports were submitted back in 2020, 2021, and as new data is coming in, Ford WSP is preparing updated reports to look at the new data and submit it. And so we responded to 2 back in November, and there's 3 more addendums which are just pending my review, and I'm going to be getting to them very shortly. But the biggest thing that I've noticed is that the addendums are consistent with the original submittals. So that means the path forward for this project remains protective of human health and the environment. So this is another good thing that we're seeing with the data that's coming in. Next, we have monitored natural attenuation. So this is remediation that relies on naturally occurring reduction of contamination. This is being proposed for areas where the soil gas plume doesn't warrant active remediation, where we've got concentrations over our screening levels, but we're not seeing vapor intrusion. So the proposed approach is to make sure those concentrations continue to decrease and don't pose a problem in the future. But with that remediation approach, it does need to be demonstrated through monitoring. So one of the communities where this is the proposed approach, the One Ford Road community, we just approved in November the remedial design and implementation plan. And so that is going to set forth the installation of a few additional groundwater monitoring wells, as well as a few additional soil gas probes to monitor that particular area. And then finally is the soil vapor extraction systems. I'm going to show where those 2 are being proposed on the next slide, but I've been talking about this for the last couple meetings, and they're not installed yet. There have been delays with the City of Newport Beach permitting and delays with Southern California Edison for the power location identification, as well as working access negotiations for that. So WSP and Ford are working with the communities and the various agencies to keep things moving forward. So if you have more questions, we'll answer those during the Q&A session. I know Daniela has since Ford and WSP are the ones planning and executing the construction activities, she'll be able to provide a better timeline and details on that. So this just shows the 2 areas. So it covers about half of Bay Ridge Park, and then the diagonal half of Belcourt Terrace here. And so then we have this remediation process, and you guys have seen this slide a number of times, but I just want to highlight in the remedial design process the one component here, which is secure the necessary permits from city, county, and other oversight agencies. They have the city as well as the Air Quality Management District for the soil vapor extraction systems, because they collect, they remove the vapors from below the ground, so we want to make sure what is being discharged to the air is not going to negatively impact human health. And so there are public notice processes that are in place for both the Air Quality Management District as well as the City of Newport Beach. And that is in the works. And so I know they have their different mailing zones for who gets notified. And again, Danielle, I can probably give you more of those details if you need them. So what's next? It's the same three things as the last meeting, but I'm going to still go over it because it bears repeating. We have monitoring. That is going to be ongoing until case closure. That includes groundwater and soil gas. But, you know, a couple notes of what is going to be coming up is the installation of some new groundwater monitoring wells based on that data gap assessment activity. So there's been a couple areas where we've collected groundwater grab samples, and now we want to monitor it and see what is going on over time. And I mentioned at the last meeting, some of the soil gas probes have been removed from the routine sampling because they have either historically had non-detect analytical results, meaning the laboratory method did not detect any of those contaminants above their reporting limits, or they have consistently been non-functioning. Sometimes the soil type is too tight and they cannot get a sample out of it. It's unable to pull a gas sample. So next we have the risk assessments, and we are going to continue to update and amend those risk assessment reports as more data becomes available. So just like with all of the originals, the addendums do go through toxicologist Amanda with OEHA. She looks at all of the numbers that are calculated and prepared and is that kind of independent set of eyes for what WSP is preparing. And the three that I've recently received that are in my court that I'll be responding to soon are for the communities of Belcourt Master, Corsica Villas, and One Ford Road. And then finally is remediation. So we are stuck in that remedial design process. There's been those permitting delays that has extended that, anticipated 6-month time frame to significantly longer. But Ford and WSP are working closely with the communities and the permitting agencies for continued forward progress. And then groundwater monitoring wells and soil gas probes are going to be getting installed in the communities where that monitored natural attenuation is proposed. And then for the communities that are going to have the active remediation, they're going to have soil vapor extraction wells installed, as well as the underground piping to connect to the remediation system. And I'll say when it comes to the upcoming activities, there is going to be increased communication. So if you live within a community where they're going to be drilling or trenching or anything like that, the notifications are going to go up significantly. We don't want anyone to be caught off guard, unaware. So there'll be mailers. In some of the communities, there will be emails. Some will even get phone calls to update them. And that has all been, is all getting communicated with the various communities as necessary. And so then, just really to summarize, we're continuing, or we're having Ford continue the monitoring activities, always continuing efforts to gain access and test indoor air. We want to begin remediation activities in those select areas following that remediation process. Continuing the community-specific meetings and communications, those are ongoing and as needed. So you're not going to be flooded with information if there's no new information to be given. And then for any additional information, the Water Board has their state database called GeoTracker. There is every correspondence and report since at least 2005 up there. There are a couple of the older reports, but it also includes bore logs and analytical data and so much more. So it can be a little more difficult to navigate. Ford has their site-specific website. I've been told it's much user-friendly. You can easily get some of the public outreach material there. But the water board also has a webpage that has a lot of the public outreach material there as well. And the state also has an email subscription called Liris List. And so if you sign up for that, you're going to hear when the next public meeting is. And then there is the local information repository here at the library if you prefer a paper copy for reviewing any of these documents. And that concludes my part.
Okay, in those handouts, one moment and I'll be right there. In those handouts, the numbers and website and information is in there. So if you got those, you're in the know. And I'm going to open this up for questions. So I know one person has a question. Anybody else right now? Okay, so I'm going to do the popcorn. 1, 2, 3. And I think we'll stay there. Remember your numbers, please.
So what is the reasoning, or why are we seeing a delay from the city of Newport Beach and Edison on something that seems fairly important? What and why?
Okay, can you hear me? We're good? All right. Edison, I will say and Daniela, correct me if I'm wrong, but Edison experienced a significant delay post-COVID, because when COVID first hit, they stopped kind of everything. And then when they started doing power drops in those requests, there was a significant delay. So that itself, before first contact, it was 7 or 8 months, whereas it used to just be 3 or 4. Yeah, so there was that delay. I'm not sure what caused the initial delay with the city, but one of their processes is the public notice, and so they're having a public hearing. They did receive a few comments, and because of that, in order to review them and address them, they postponed that public hearing date to next week. And so from being at the end of January to now the beginning of March, I believe it's March 2nd. So that's part of that delay. But I think a lot of it is just short-staffed and, yeah.
Is that delaying the process with Bay Ridge? Will that be delaying are we now extending the time of all of the remediation that's being done? Is that on hold, or is that delaying all of that?
It's pushing the schedule back. So we were originally anticipating starting in March timeframe. That is now expected more in April, and it's sort of, we're waiting on the public hearing and on March 2nd to sort of refine what we think the schedule would be. Correct.
I have 2 questions. One of them about the delaying that the permit, but the Irvine company can get the permit immediately and install it. Was that the difference with the Irvine company can do it and the HOA cannot do it?
So,
that number 1, and then number 2, that you guys said that the tracker or something that the geo, who monitor that? Do you know?
So for your first question regarding the Irvine company being able to install a system sooner, that one, we're not the oversight agency, so I'm not sure. But one of the likely possibilities is because that is a small unit, and it could be that it's a various locations permit, which allows them to kind of mobily install, and some of them do even operate off of a generator and can go without the power drop. So that may be what it is, but that's just speculation.
This is huge. This is huge.
That one I'm not
like
aware
a
of then.
small vacuum system. It's a huge.
Okay.
And running like a 6-inch PVC entire behind that all the stores right along that between the apartments and at the shopping center of Newport North.
Okay.
So, okay.
Yeah, that one I'm just not familiar with, so I wouldn't be able to, I don't know what the
About the growth tracker, who monitored that one?
So that one it's the state database. So WSP uploads documents. It's required. There's an electronic submittal electronic submittal requirement regulation, and so they have to upload all the data, analytical data, reports, and additional things. And once that comes in, I will kind of scan over it to make sure it's, you know, stamped by either a professional engineer or professional geologist and meets a couple of the right requirements, and then it gets uploaded. And then I review it.
There's some information over there. It's not existing, even though the time, year, and the companies and all that stuff wasn't exist in that time that the date being posted. So it says unknown, that I don't know, can be unknown, should be a name or somebody be responsible if they put some date and the blame they put it on. They're supposed to put that their information for the legal.
Yeah, so with that, you know what, I will look at it. It's probably the local oversight program is the lead, but I'm not sure. So I'll have to look it up and get back to you. So after this, if you just give me your information, I can get back to you on that.
Daniela, the planning office said that they delayed the hearing that was last month because they had received quite a few letters from homeowners. Do you know what the comments and complaints and questions were in those homeowner letters? Can you share that with us?
Yeah, sure. There was concern from the homeowners that are located closest to where the building will be constructed, regarding various things that we've talked about in these meetings: noise, safety, and all, you know, concern about how long it would run, things like that. Because the comments were received about 24 hours before the public hearing, the city felt, and we agreed, it was justified to properly address each individual comment with a response to comment letter so that the individuals who commented could get each of their concerns addressed. We also reached out to each of those commenters to invite them to have a discussion with us so we could really hear their concerns and try to get those addressed. So that's what pushed it out, is, you know, because of the desire to make sure folks could get the information that they needed about the system.
Hi, my name's Lee Healy. I'm a resident at 92 Hartford Drive. I don't know if you're a resident at Bay Ridge as well. But yes, I would like to address those specifically because they were more than comments. They were really very vigorous objections. This is an arbitrary location at 94 Hartford. Our next door neighbors, they are a lot younger than most of us. They have a 1-year-old baby. And the city, everything was done when we got the notices that were planted where we live, plus in the mail, everything done to, you know, procedure. We responded within the proper time. It was then the decision, it was best to delay, to give, you know, thought to what our objections were. The location where it is now is 3 feet from the residence. The city is supposed to be at least 8 feet, and it is an arbitrary location. It was not the primary location. This came about because the 13 wells that are going to be among 160 plus units at Bay Ridge, there were objections that they would lose too many parking spaces for these individual units, where the groundwaters, the contaminated vapors, would be diffused and cleaned. And so now they decided, let's just do one, which actually faces Country Club Drive, but is very close to the firewall at 94 Hartford. If there's an earthquake, the stuff is prefab that's inside it. The company is a consultancy, the engineers that are putting this thing together, there's just a lot of variables, and it is a safety issue. The other issue is the value of our homes. And who knows if in a year the Santa Ana Water Board is going to have it at the right levels. We don't know. Who's going to go in there and clean out the groundwaters that are contaminated after the vapors go out? Just seems there might be other locations that might be safer. So that's the reason.
Yeah, we've had in that development a construction yard literally built in the north end of the complex, well away from residences, where the prevailing winds off the ocean would take any fumes onto the boulevard and not back into residences. I think it's a really ill thought out plan to converge 13 wells when you were going to do 5 other substations around the complex, but for some reason, because it was more convenient, less expensive, I don't know. You're using charcoal technology that can fail. There's just too many reasons not to put this right next to our neighbor with a newborn, basically. So we're on record of objecting to that. And where the construction yard has always been, when up on the, and there's no residence, 35, 40 feet away from any resident, and the winds will take it away from the complex, not blow it back into people's houses. That is really dumb. Okay, and let me get a couple of, last meeting, I asked, when you mentioned that you had readings for the build out of 1 Ford Road, you had all the data, and I asked for the data, gave my email again, crickets. So I would like that information. We've been in our residence for about 37, 38 years. So, I appreciate you guys are doing a good job, and it's your job, God bless you. The readings today seem okay. What were they 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago? We've been breathing this stuff in and raising a family and without any knowledge that we were living adjacent to a toxic dump. So that's why we're a little concerned about this whole procedure and what's going on here. And we're really going to need a third-party scientist crew to come in and tell us, from an objective point of view, if all this stuff really makes any sense.
So we,
You got storms that come in, you got all kinds of things that can disrupt this material in the ground, and you're trying to tell us that a little charcoal filtering and everything's going to be wonderful. So we're really skeptical right now.
Yeah.
Okay?
And we've definitely, I will say over the course of the 5 years, we've heard from so many community members on the skepticalness of everything. We've heard it from every.
You can't tell us the amounts that are dumped over the years.
Yeah, so
you haven't followed the Ford workers to see what kind of medical problems they have. You haven't followed long-term residents to see what kind of medical problems they have. Anecdotally, I see a neurologist. She goes, "Oh, yeah, that explains why I'm seeing so many people from with Parkinson's in this area." Come on, let's get real on this stuff.
I will say when it comes to. I'm gonna let Amanda touch on Parkinson's and TCE, if you can. I don't know.
If it's not a scientific study, it doesn't mean anything. If you're not following people diligently and spending more of Ford's money to do it right, then it's a bunch of nonsense.
So there's, I know Amanda's touched on the health studies in the past, and I think it's the.
Follow long-term residents.
It's.
Ford workers.
That's something.
They're there. People are still alive that live here. You can go down a list and give us something real.
I'll let Amanda address that one.
Yeah, well, we've been poisoned for 35 years, and now it's all supposed to be wonderful.
So I reached out to the Department of Public Health, and there's a cancer registry and a birth defects registry. So when
There's only one harm from these two chemicals.
Okay, but I'm going to ask her to be, I'm going to let her finish, please. And I'm happy to give you the microphone again. No, it's okay. It's okay. I'd just like her to get that information out so others may hear it.
So, and I can put you in touch with these folks if you would like more information from them. When a case of cancer is diagnosed or a birth defect, it goes into a statewide registry. So.
Well, I've got cancer. Did anybody follow me up to see what my cause was? I've got 3 or 4 things that can come out of this exposure.
So.
I can't prove that it's from breathing 35 years of toxic fumes.
Now, one of the things that we ask with that concern, because we've heard that, is has your home been sampled, and do we have data? And okay, it's been sampled. Because that's some of the information that we want to look at, and that's why we want to be able to work to get mitigation, get it cleaned up, and move forward with that, because that is very scary when it comes to your health and in this unknown.
Home has been sampled twice, and we had another one I had a cold, and the lady didn't want to come in, so that was like 2 weeks ago. Really, what is so critical right now for Bay Ridge residents is the immediacy of the installation of this shed and the convening of 13 wells into this one spot for the cleaning. I mean, it's too much.
So I'm going to let Daniela touch on the remediation system. The type of remediation is soil vapor extraction. It's something that's been around for, are we talking 40 or 50 years? It is a tried and true cleanup technology.
It's not fail-safe, however.
And
you're not doing real-time monitoring. So there's too many gaps there for me. Have you guys done a study on the foliage and trees and how much has been uptaken into the root systems? That won't go away. That's there for a long time.
Oops, sorry. Can you?
Yes, there
Okay. TCE is a chemical that we do look at, our risk assessors do look at kind of eco uptake, and it is not something that kind of bioaccumulates in the same way that some other chemicals have. So we haven't done any sampling in Bay Ridge Park, but there would be no expectation of being able to detect it within plants. To speak a little to some of the other comments regarding the design of the system, you're correct. We initially had proposed and we presented to the community. We had a poolside meeting with inviting everyone at Bay Ridge Park, and we had originally proposed small-scale temporary systems that would be located in 5 different parking areas within the community. Based on feedback that we got, a lot of people commented, called, wrote emails. That design was too intrusive to neighbors' homes, livelihoods, and they requested that we reconsider and redesign the system. Where we ended with that, working with the HOA board in discussion and selecting locations, was to reduce the number of wells, and that was through kind of designing them slightly differently so we could have fewer wells that had a greater impact over area. That also reduced the number of linear feet of piping that would need to be installed, thereby reducing the time it takes to construct. And then instead of these small, temporary kind of what would be, let's say, in like a small shipping container type system that would sit in the parking spaces, there was concern that the shipping containers were, 1, too impactful, 2, ugly, 3, they just were kind of too disruptive. So we went to a more, I would say more like an ADU looking structure. It's a little bit more, not made of metal. It's got siding that will match the home's roofing. And in communication with the HOA board, the location outside of 94 Hartford was selected. We also talked to the fire department because it is right around that fire road. Could we construct this in a way that the fire department could still have access? They approved that. We looked at various other places all along Country Club Drive, all along Bison Avenue, kind of outside the walls of the community. That was one of the really big sticking points for residents of Bay Ridge Park, particularly related to their property value, what they see day to day, the aesthetic look. They wanted something that was outside the walls of the community, obviously still on Bay Ridge Park property, but the restrictions along Bison Ave and Country Club Drive are really related to, city regulations, slope stability. There's a moratorium on Bison, so we can't actually even conduct work there and disturb the road. That's moratoriums until 2025. Same with along Country Club Drive. There's very limited space. With regards to the 8-foot separation, which is what is written as part of building code, that is kind of an aesthetic basis. And so we've worked with the city as well as the fire department to make sure that the space that will be maintained between the 2 buildings is still safe for all earthquake, all structural, all fire regulations, and that meets all California building code. We would not build something that doesn't meet California building code. So that 8-foot, yes, the 8-foot aesthetic distance isn't being met, but all California building code requirements, all safety measures are being met with this location.
Well, I appreciate that you want something that looks good, but I'm trying to, not continue to breathe anything from the Ford plant. And you're going to take 13 wells. They're going to meet 20 feet out of our front door, right next to our neighbor's windows, and you're gonna use charcoal under a filtration system under high pressure and clean out all of the air that comes through, and then that has to be re-exhausted 25, 30 feet from where we sleep and right next to our neighbor's baby's bedroom. And for what reason? I mean, that exhaust should be well away from anybody's residence. Why are you asking a handful of people to risk failure of your filtration system, the pipes that could burst if you get an earthquake? And then last time you told me that the monitoring is like a 2 or 3 week delay while you air sample.
Yep.
And then, if you don't have real-time monitoring, which I understand is available, and you don't have that building away from people, then you're defeating the purpose of trying to clean up for public safety.
Thanks for reminding me. There were some additional things that I wanted to that you brought up that I can help address. So the system, the treatment system is designed with a lot of redundancy, meaning that even if one portion designed fails, there are backup to that so that there is safety in that redundancy. One of the things, just to give an example, we did do a pilot study about SVE treatment that was done in 2020 in Bay Ridge Park, as well as a couple of other areas. And what we found from the effluent, meaning we were measuring what was coming out of the treatment system, was there were no detections of any chemicals. Now, of course, that was a short-term program, but that is a good indication of what we would expect. With regards to the monitoring, last time I was here, I was a little bit mistaken in what I said about the monitoring. We are required by the AQMD, that's the Air Quality Management District. They are the ones that permit this system, and they set a permit that is health protective even to the most sensitive population. So that would include elderly, that would include sick, that would include infants. Requirements of that permit do include real-time monitoring, so I was mistaken earlier. So the system, when it first starts up, gets monitored real-time every day for the first 7 days of operation. After the first 7 days of operation, then there is an evaluation of what the frequency needs to be, and that would be anywhere between every day, once a week, and I think it goes out to like every 2 weeks or something along there, depending on what is being measured. In addition to that, we collect samples per the permit and we send them, this is what I was talking about last time, we send them to a analytical lab that can actually determine exactly the chemical concentration of everything that's being detected. We not only collect samples at the effluent, meaning at the very end of the discharge, which we expect to be non-detect like it was in the pilot test. We also take samples along the center of the treatment train. So between the two treatment vessels, those are the activated carbon that you're referring to. And if we detect anything in that middle vessel, meaning the vapors go through one vessel, get treated, if anything is detected there before it gets treated by the second vessel and then discharged, we do what we call a carbon changeout. So we clean out all that old carbon and we provide new carbon so that it can still effectively treat. And there's still that redundancy to catch any vapors that might be passing through as the carbon gets used up. So that level of redundancy does help give the AQMD as well as the community the hopefully confidence that there is nothing that's being discharged to the air that would be negatively impacting human health. We also have structural in terms of natural disaster is definitely a concern. So there is specific requirements in terms of bracing and anchoring things for earthquakes, There are fire ratings that we have to meet. We've worked closely with the city on that. The system itself will be remotely monitored so that if, let's say, there was a sudden loss of power, or let's say there was a natural disaster, we would not only be notified through an alarm instantly, we could also have the power to shut off the system instantly remotely, so it's not like someone has to go out there. It could be shut down in a safe and secure manner and respond very, very quickly. The vapors that are getting extracted from within the roads of Hartford Drive and those are all under vacuum, meaning that instead of pressure building up, right, it's a vacuum, so there's no risk of like a pipe exploding or something like that because the pressure is going in the other direction. So that also means if there is a leak or anything, the airflow is actually going into those pipes rather than pushing out. And that's another way that's how SV systems are designed, but sort of another, understanding that kind of, there's no risk really of explosion or pressure buildup in that way.
And what I'll add, if that location ends up being the only feasible location from an engineering standpoint and all of that, one of the things that they do have now, and it wouldn't be feasible to do it during the whole duration of the project, but there is continuous indoor air monitoring that can occur. So what we could do is apply that to the, I can, reach out to one of the subcontractors that does continuous monitoring, so they are getting real-time results, analytical results, to see and provide that data. Now, it wouldn't be for the entire duration, but I think if it ends up being in that specific location is the only feasible one, then maybe that's something that can happen to provide that extra peace of mind, because I hear your concerns.
That sounds like a lovely system, and these systems are going to go into the other developments eventually, right? So maybe Bay Ridge is a little guinea pig that you can try to get it right, but I see no reason why it can't go into the parking area. I think maybe people have decided they don't want to give up parking places because it won't affect them if it comes down where you're planning it now. I would strongly suggest to find a better area. It has to be done. We understand that, and we just don't. Would you want it next to your bedroom window? That's, ask yourself that question when you make your decision. And then I also wanted to know about the groundwater. How are you getting rid of that? Is that get filtered out and put in drums and carted away, or how do you do that?
So the groundwater is minimally impacted in really throughout the entire project. There's a couple areas south of the former facility that some of the groundwater grab samples we want to further monitor and do some cleanup. Now, this is shallow groundwater, so it's not your drinking water. Drinking water is supplied by the local water purveyor. It meets all state and federal requirements, but the primary for the northern portion, so Bay Ridge Park on down to the Bonita Creek area. The primary cleanup is probably going to be that monitored natural attenuation. We've seen concentrations over time decrease, and they are slightly over the drinking water standard. So we have a lot of sites that get closure at these concentrations. Here we're monitoring a little longer.
And Jessica, when you say shallow, it means it's not drinking water, but it's still at Bay Ridge Park about 50 feet below ground surface. So you're not going to, by mistake, run into it if you were, digging in your garden or anything.
Are you a council person for the city of Newport Beach?
I am. I'm the district court council person.
Okay. Do you know what the moratorium is that she mentioned?
The moratorium? There's moratoriums on Bison Ave. Perry, I sent that to Dennis. That the link to it on the city, but it's basically a request on certain streets, which includes Bison Ave, I think MacArthur also, no subsurface disturbance to the street for a duration of time. It's usually 5 years. So the one on Bison Ave is going to expire in 2025.
Yeah, I just saw the moratorium. It's a list of streets, and it says the city of Newport Beach doesn't want any building on these streets. Doesn't say anything about digging in the street. It just, so as an example, in his case, you could have a building right next to his neighbor in the middle of the houses that will cause the value of homes to go down. Or in my community, which is Belcourt Terrace, they want to build, well, one building right in the middle of the homes, right across from her street, her house, and another building on Belcourt Drive in the middle of the community. The alternatives would be to put them on Bison. There's a big space between Bison and where the homes are built. You could build all along Bison. Or you could build on Country Club Lane. Or you could build down by the gatehouse on Belcourt Drive, away from the homes. So there are alternatives, but what's happened here is last minute, we got to build it quick. And then they threw up at the last phone call I was on. They said the moratorium from Newport Beach, it's Newport Beach's fault that we can't build on Bison. It's not our fault. It's the city of Newport Beach has made up this list. I saw the list. It's like 4 pages of streets. Have no explanation why you can't build a compound, a building along Bison or along Country Club Lane. That seemed like it makes more sense, and it solves his problem of getting this shed away from the homes. So I would consider that the city of Newport Beach maybe reconsider.
Okay, thank you for your comment. All right. Wait, I'm going to ask you to speak into the microphone. Thank you.
So I agree with 2 things. As far as an earthquake, okay, we have all these lines coming from all of these testing wells going out to this. Let's say there's a breakage. Maybe it's not even an earthquake. Maybe it's PVC piping or whatever it is, and it breaks. Is there an emergency shutoff, or what happens to that gas that's now not being processed the correct way? How do you stop if there is an emergency?
Yeah, so if there is an emergency, one will be notified immediately about.
Okay, in the meantime, we have toxic air flowing. If it's summer or windows are open.
Yeah, so the system is designed, and I don't know, Ken, if you want to jump in here, but the air that is flowing through the piping, the treatment system, is actually at a lower concentration than what it is in the ground, because it is essentially not at a static state.
Okay, I understand, but now you're taking all this concentration.
And
so it is going to be the air itself, but now it's.
The system is sort of self-contained. So if let's say we shut this power to the system off, or
like
it does
a pipe break.
So if a pipe breaks, basically air will just flow into the system and it'll just be diluted more.
Right.
Okay.
So there wouldn't be any risk from a health perspective. Okay. If, let's say, power died, let's say whatever, power is knocked out, the system would shut down. We do have it operating with a UPS, so an uninterrupted power supply, but let's say that goes out as well. The gas would just, since it's under vacuum, it wouldn't go anywhere, right? It's like the air will flow towards it. I don't know, Ken, if you could explain it.
Exactly. It's all under a vacuum. Pardon? I'm Ken Connor. I work with WSP, who works for Ford. I am a California PE. I've been a California PE for over 27 years now.
PE means professional engineer.
Exactly. And I've been designing these systems since 1987. Okay, so they're tried and true. They're not they're not chaos machines or anything like that. This is something that we've been doing for a very, very long period of time, and it's one of the safest remediation methods that we have, for exactly the reason that I'm about to explain, that everything is under a vacuum, okay? And if the vacuum is shut off, let's say that the piping breaks, then there's no pressure differential. There's nothing to pull the vapor from the ground. It's going to be like it is right now. It just won't move any further. I know what you're thinking, that somehow there's a pump underground that's pushing the contaminated material up and out, and that's not what's going on. We're pulling it. It's kind of like you're sucking on a straw, and somewhere in the middle the straw is broken. Well, you're not going to get any more soda up once the vacuum is cut out. So there's almost a safety factor built into it, so that we have something like this in a residential area. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. I'll be more than happy to, afterwards, we can sit down and talk.
I've got two. Other questions? Okay. We will remain after, if you have questions specific to your property, if you'd like to discuss your specific situation. Again, the city hearing on the permit is next week, Tuesday, I believe. Am I correct?
Thursday.
Thursday, thank you. Thursday, and we have, there's handouts back there that talk about both the Air District's permitting process and the City of Newport Beach's permitting process, and who to contact at both of those agencies. So one more time, any other questions, comments? Oh, okay. Oh, I have a gentleman right back here that hasn't spoken yet.
Hello, my name's Don. I have a question in the slide that was up regarding the One Ford Road remediation that relies on naturally occurring reduction of contamination. Mm-hmm. So it seems like there was already a implementation plan approved for the One Ford Road community back in November. So am I interpreting that to mean that there's no action need to be done? It's just waiting for nature to take its course. And I would assume it says naturally occurring reduction of contamination. Are those levels of contamination that are naturally waiting for it to leave being monitored? And then what is that contamination that is being naturally leaving? What is it called, or what is it? If you're out for a walk and it's naturally leaving, is it in the air, is it in the ground, or I'm curious what that means.
Yeah, so with One Ford Road in particular, what does have to happen is there needs to be installed, I think it's 8 or 9 groundwater monitoring wells and a handful of soil gas probes. It is monitored. We want to make sure concentrations of the particular contaminants that are found below the ground surface are decreasing. The 2 primary ones are called trichloroethene, or TCE, and the other one is tetrachloroethene, or PCE. Those ones, what it is they're all below ground, and really for the soil gas, what we have seen is the earth kind of just breathes, as barometric pressure changes. You get an influx of the atmospheric air that goes into the ground, and as just the natural movement of air below the ground, it is being diluted. It's a slow process, but we're seeing that happen. One of the good signs of seeing those soil gas concentrations decrease means that there's no continuing source of contamination to feed that would need some kind of active cleanup. Same goes with groundwater. Groundwater moves very slowly. We're talking like maybe a foot per day, not even, sorry, no. Inches per year. I haven't looked at the groundwater gradient in a little bit.
5 feet. Yeah, per year or something.
Okay, it's very slow, but in that process, non-impacted groundwater is mixing with that, and it's just slowly reducing. That's a really common thing. Another one, sometimes you have the right conditions in there's microbes that will consume these, but that is not necessarily for the One Ford Road community. That gets utilized in the south of the site. But there are ways to naturally reduce these concentrations. But this one is just the natural
it's
reduction.
underground.
It's all underground. And one of the things, part of the vapor intrusion assessment and in doing that indoor air sampling is we have the need to look at the potential for air pollution and how that may be impacting, or is what's below ground coming up and impacting outdoor air. I will say in the all of the outdoor air samples collected, there may have been 1 or 2 detections, and we're talking hundreds of samples, and even those were the kind of one-offs that could be is the canister cleaned properly, or was it something else? But the point being that outdoor air from all of these outdoor air samples are not impacted by what's below ground. And so this has been another good sign that what is below ground is not coming up.
Okay. I have a microphone for you. Thank you for waiting.
Hello, Doug, Belcourt Terrace. Question, actually, this is for you, Kenny. How long does, once this vacuum cleaner is put in place, what are your estimations for how long this thing is going to go on for? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it?
1 year.
So,
is it till the money runs out?
No. That's not the criteria at all. But we're anticipating that we're going to be running it for about a year. Okay.
A year, 1 year.
But as what Jessica has said, and to partially answer the last gentleman's question, and it's part of an answer to yours as well, is all of this is being monitored. And we're going to be into change management throughout this, that if we're doing natural attenuation, we're monitoring something for natural attenuation. If it isn't doing what we're hoping that it's doing, we'll bring in something active in order to make it happen. The same thing with the SVE. If we find after a year that we need to do some sort of process, such as turning it off and letting things pulse, letting things come back to equilibrium in the subsurface, and then turn it on again, we'll do that. It could be that we go from a year of operation to operating for 2 or 3 weeks and then having it off for 3 or 4 months and turning it on again. But what we found over time at SVE sites like this across the country, and especially here in Southern California, where you have a deep vadose zone between where the land is all the way down to the groundwater, what we found is that it works best if we can get the initial huge amount of mass out and then allow the system to come to equilibrium, turn something off, then turn it back on. So we're hoping that we'll get out enough mass in that first year that we might not have to ever turn it on again, that it'll be safe enough at that point. That's what we're hoping. But to answer your question, at other sites that we've had, certainly there have been times where things were more, slow than what we had hoped. Okay? In this case, we have the pilot test, which really showed an exhaustion of the amount of mass that was there over a very, very short period of time. So I would doubt seriously whether even at the year mark that we're really pulling out that much at that point in time.
And I was going to add, from even that pilot test, one of the things that has, as the case manager on the regulatory side looking at this, I'm interested in how much after the 15 days it operated, how much of what they removed and that drop in concentration has come back. And one of the things that I've seen is that it's stayed low. I haven't seen it shoot back up, which is a really huge positive for the high likelihood of the success of this treatment, and that Ford has to, whenever there's a remediation system, we require remediation progress reports. So we want to see how much of that contamination has been removed and what is that looking like? Is it necessary to stop it prior to that year? Is it necessary to go longer than that year? Should they do that pulsing that he mentioned sooner, or is is it not addressing the vapor intrusion and getting to the area shallower? So we're looking at everything holistically and making real-time changes. Just because we're on like this path forward doesn't mean if it's not working, we're going to course correct as soon as we recognize that it's not the appropriate path forward. Although I don't anticipate it just from what data we have seen collected so far.
So for sure you're running it for a full year, then you're going to shut it down, then you're going to see what happens and then turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off for maybe another year.
Right. It's kind of that adage that I think Eisenhower had, you have plans and then there's planning. We're really into the planning side of this, that I'm saying we're going to be running it for a year. We could find after 3 or 4 weeks that we've exhausted what's there and we're not pulling anything out. And we would go to the water board, sit down with Jessica and say, this might be better to turn it off now, pulse it, let it wait for 2 or 3 weeks, and then turn it back on and see if we get any mass. The good thing here, and I know that there have been so many bad things, okay? The good thing here at this particular site is that you don't have a huge amount of contaminant in the groundwater to feed into the subsurface, into that vadose zone. And we don't know of any, with all the holes that we put in the ground, we still haven't seen this huge mass of material that's just sitting there. Okay, it seems like all of this material has migrated to these areas. And that gives us a really good fighting chance of taking care of this with the SVE system quickly. So yes, we're planning for that 1 year, but we could be coming back to you and saying that we have better news. This is working out better than what we had thought. The main thing here also is we're really right on the verge of making it much safer, even for those homes that have something inside, that where there's been vapor intrusion into their houses, right? We're very, very close to turning that switch back the other way, that there isn't a contaminant there underneath the subsurface to get inside the house. And that might take just a few weeks, a few months with the SVE. So let's see how things work out. We're very confident that this will work out well, okay, with respect to that. And it's not a technology that, we're doing something innovative regarding it. It's something that's happened at a lot of sites. We have a lot of data and information.
And one of the things, because there is a lot of interest in how effective are these remediation systems going to be. Right now we do the public meetings every 6 months just to give broad updates, but some of the things that we've talked about has been, can we do like monthly emails to the community members to allow them, to give them progress updates that are not so technical, because the data that comes to me is very technical. So can we prepare some kind of one-page document for the public to give updates on what is going on with it and what are the next steps? Is it continuing to operate? Are we seeing better cleanup than expected? Are we still on that year time frame? To help communicate that as well.
So yeah, I think we're all just eagerly anticipating the finality of this whole. This thing's been going on for decades and decades and decades, right? So
understood. And it's frustrating. I rarely use that word. If you know me, I rarely use that word. But it's been frustrating because of some of the permitting issues and the COVID situation that we found ourselves in. That at one point in time, there was a time frame where certain electrical hookups could happen, within an X amount of time. But COVID happens, and most of the people my age or slightly older have left SoCal Edison, to help with things like this, and it took us many more months just to get that initial look at. So yes, we're there with you. We were hoping to have the construction happening much earlier than this. And, it gives me no joy at all to have to tell Jessica and others, here's another delay that we're running up against. So don't get us wrong. We're trying to get this done and get out of your lives, especially on the construction side.
SVE system, you guys are putting for TCE or for PCE? For which chemical that are you guys installing to do that?
So it's for anything that really is a volatile organic carbon.
As you know, the PCE goes down, it doesn't come up.
So
TCE comes up.
the PCE and the TCE, what I think you're referring to has something to do with what it does in water because of its density. But with respect to both the PCE and the TCE, for this type of work on the SVE system, really not worried about them being neutrally buoyant or anything like that in that system. The vacuum will take care of whatever is there. It'll move the material through.
But isn't that percolate PCE goes towards down instead of coming to the air?
When in its natural form, as a raw like solvent, when it is spilled to the ground, the primary spill does move downward through soil and encounters into groundwater, which is why when it hits groundwater, will travel more vertically downward because it is heavier than water. So it's called a dense non-aqueous liquid. And so when it comes to, though, like in that process, it's still off-gassing because it's volatile. Kind of like I've used in the past examples of gasoline. When you have gas and it spills, it volatilizes, and that's why you're getting that smell. So even in a spill, you have the vapor. So now the contamination is all dissolved. It's either, it's primarily, I don't even think from the soil samples that we're seeing it even in any kind of soil contamination, it is all dissolved in groundwater. So that contaminated groundwater is reaching its equilibrium for where it's happiest, as in its kind of steady state. And that's where these vapors have come from. So it's what was in that shallow groundwater that has off-gassed and has contributed to the soil vapor plume. And so those do rise. And one of the things that we have seen in some of the deeper soil gas samples to shallower is as it moves up, it decreases. I don't know that I have seen any of our soil gas probes where it has done the opposite. So that's another supporting line of evidence where we are confident that there isn't any shallow contamination that remains. It is groundwater source, and it does decrease as it's mixing with the just air below the ground surface.
As you said, that being heavier goes down instead of
Yeah, and so part of that data gap assessment, when I mentioned it, we're collecting those groundwater samples at those multiple depths because it can dive. We want to make sure that it doesn't get missed. And so that was some of that data gap assessment activities. And so we make sure we find a clean bottom before we say we're done.
Okay, I'm going to do a time check. We have just a couple minutes before we're wrapping up, and we have one more question or comment.
I may have asked this at previous meetings, but it seems more relevant now to the remediation project. But what happens, we're on the Newport-Inglewood Fault, that's where we all live. It's not a question of if, it's just when the next big roller comes through, disturbs all the water, disturbs all the soil pockets, and then, you know, can't that release new pockets of chemicals that you weren't aware of before, or, you know, can't that we be right back where we're starting from now when the next earthquake hits?
I am trying to think back on any of my historical sites or past conversations with folks. I don't know that I have ever heard of an earthquake increasing or affecting a contaminated site. But I'll look into it. We've got, you know.
I would say one of the mechanisms why I don't think it would, at least with regards to soil vapor. So if the earth shifts and you can imagine cracks in the asphalt or whatever, new pathways for air to go from the underground to the outdoor air, that will dissipate and dilute so quickly that we wouldn't even be able to detect the concentrations. Why it's different with vapor intrusion into a home is when there is a lack of ventilation, those chemicals can build up as they sort of kind of intrude into the property. But with any ventilation, so an open door, an open window, a gust of wind, that would dilute them. And so in the outdoor air, you wouldn't be able to even measure any difference if they kind of the earth moved and kind of released pockets of air.
And I'll add, so I'm a member with the California EPA vapor intrusion work group, and one of the members, one of the concerns is, you know, if there's an earthquake and you've got additional cracks in the foundation, can that increase vapor intrusion? And one of our members, her husband is a civil engineer, and he said, if you're going to have cracks after an earthquake, it's going to be in your walls, and that will increase airflow and the ventilation of a home. So I've heard the couple, but this is why we're going to continue with the ongoing monitoring. But I haven't heard of it disrupting or creating any significant release of or any kind of release of chemicals that would change. But I'll dig into that for you.
Okay. All right. Well, we are at time, and I want to thank, we got through all the questions. I want to thank everybody for attending. Again, we'll stay after if you have any questions that you'd like to ask us individually. And I wish you a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you.